Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Cielle Heiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. And today we're going to do a crash course in Asteroids 101, what asteroids are, how to interpret them astrologically, how to look them up in your chart, and everything that you need to know to be able to work with asteroids astrologically. And so Lori and I attended a conference with Demetra George back in December that had to do all about the asteroids and how to interpret them. Demetra George is an amazing astrologer who literally wrote the book on asteroids astrologically and has really pioneered a lot of these techniques. And asteroids are really exciting to work with because they're new techniques to be working with. And the first asteroids were only discovered in the 1800s. And so, I'm trained in Hellenistic traditional, like ancient astrology. And it's really fun to merge these more modern techniques that, were not being used by the ancients because they didn't have, asteroids. They were not aware of the asteroids, but merging those techniques with like the ancient techniques with the modern use of asteroids is just a really fun thing to be doing. And the asteroids are, there's a couple million of them that have been like that we know of in the asteroid belt, which is located between Mars and Jupiter in the solar system. And Jupiter, who's known for being stabilizing, their gravitational pull literally keeps the asteroid belt from crashing into us on Earth, which I think is pretty cool and shows a little bit more about like Jupiter's significations.
Mhm.
But the asteroid belt is physically located between Mars and Jupiter. And there's about 27,000 named asteroids. And the way that they're named is if an astronomer discovers a new asteroid, they have the rights to name it. And so there's asteroids that are named so many different things. There's an asteroid named Alex. There's an asteroid, named Beer. There's asteroids named after a lot of mythic people and characters. There's asteroids named after locations. Um, and they're pretty fun to look up, what asteroids are in your chart and what stories and names and places are significant in your life. Do
Yeah.
you have anything to add about that, Lori?
Yeah. So there's so many different ways, obviously, you can go about it. But basically, like there's asteroids with people's names. You can find a lot of first and last names in there. There's a decent amount of like foods in there, like nut and beer, and um there were like just random food and random objects. A lot of like Disney characters I noticed had asteroids. Regular people names. There's been regular like most of the Greek mythology stories have one. Um, I mean there's an asteroid for most people, places, or things. A lot of places have one. I know Cincinnati has one. Um, yeah, just like you can look for where you live, you can look for your own name, you can look for random things. I've heard a lot of stories of people saying that their name was found on their ascendant or their sun. Um, and like partners' names being conjunct a personal planet or on the descendant. Um, I mean, there's just so many different things that you can do with them. And yeah, that it's like unlimited. There's just so many of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and if you're wanting to look up asteroids in the birth chart, let me share my screen, and I'll share a couple different
Yeah.
ways for how you can do that. If you're like, oh, I
Mhm.
want to look up my name, I want to look up my partner's name, I want to look up where I live. Um, so let me just share my screen. And so there's a couple places you can go. You can go to astro.com. And so I'm just in my user profile here and I'll just go in for myself. And then you go to extended chart selection and you create the drawing of your choice. And then you can scroll down here and then you can see there's an asteroid name and number list with 24,555 names, which seems like they haven't been updated because Dimitri was teaching there was at least 27,000 named now.
Yeah, there's
But
almost
still,
28.
there's a lot in there. You can see I
Yeah.
have a couple. I have Adonis, Paracelsus, and Imhotep. I'm not sure what order the numbers are, but those are the three I have because they're prominent in my chart.
And
Um,
also notice that the main ones, so Chiron, Ceres, Pallas, Juno, Vesta, like those are all in the corner that you can just click on.
yeah.
And you can multiple select those. You can also get different versions of Lilith and your Lot of Fortune, your Vertex, like all of that is also over there with like the more common asteroids. So if you're looking for the goddesses, that's the easiest way to go about finding them.
Yeah. So those are there. But if you want to look up, like I was wondering earlier today, we were talking about Icarus, which will be another episode we release. And I realized I'd never looked up Icarus in my chart. So we
Mm.
could just do that right now for demonstration.
Yeah.
So I clicked on I, and you can Google Icarus asteroid number and look it up and just type it in.
Yeah, they
But
all have a number that's right next to it. So if
yeah,
you just go to Google and type in Icarus asteroid number, it'll come up and it'll show you a number next to it. And then you just go over to this little yellow box and you separate them just by a
manually
comma.
entry. Yeah, so you can do
Yeah.
that. Or you can just go through this incredibly long list. So,
There's a lot of them in there.
Icarus, we can add them.
Oh, there's an
And
Icarian too.
oh,
Spelled
that is
wrong.
cool. And, things spelled different ways. Demetra was saying, like maybe your husband's name is Robert and there's no Robert asteroid, but there's a Roberta asteroid. Like the
Yeah.
different genders of the names, you can use either gender because Roberta and
Hmm.
Robert are essentially the same name.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, you'll have like Persephone and Proserpina, which are the Greek and Latin versions of her name. Or
Hmm.
Demeter and Ceres. And so you can look up multiple names if you're
Yeah.
like looking for a specific person or place.
Yeah. And even just right here under Icarus, you can see Iceland. So, like, there's so many different places and different variations of names. My name personally doesn't have one, but I was named after, or my name technically derives from the laurel tree, the tree of life. So I've looked up laurel in my chart before. Um,
Mm,
and so like, not having your name be an asteroid, it is disappointing, but you can typically find it, find like a different variation or a different way of spelling it or something like that.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Um, and so then once you're ready, I just hit like show chart selection and then it'll pull it up and then we can see. Yeah, so I have Icarus down in Capricorn, not
Mm-hmm.
doing any much significant, but you can see I have like Imhotep and Paracelsus conjunct my moon. I have Adonis and do I have Ceres turned off right now? That's interesting. I have
Yeah,
the
looks
asteroid
like you
goddesses
do.
turned off.
Yeah.
But I also have Ceres conjunct my ascendant. I've been playing with my settings today, so they must have been turned off. And so then
Hmm.
if you want to keep it, you can hit save default settings here.
Yeah.
Um, if you're just looking up, they'll let you do 10 asteroids at a time. So I'm like, oh, I'm probably not going to keep Icarus because, they're not significant. I don't need them in my chart. So then I'm not going to save the setting because I only have 10 to choose. But
Yeah.
that's one way with astro.com that you can look up asteroids in your chart or anyone's chart that you have their data for in Astro.
Yeah, and
Um,
honestly, astro.com is really the only thing I tend to use. So, it is a really good resource. It's a very easy resource to use.
yeah, and it's free. Both of these resources are free, but that's nice too. This is a page that Demetra shared with us. We'll put it in the show notes. It's a very like casual, limited formatting type page that Spotify and YouTube keep reading as kind of spammy and not linking to,
Mhm.
but you know, I don't know much about internet security, but it's just a little asteroid page that Demetra shared with us that pulls the asteroid data. And I believe that they update it more frequently. So if you're looking for an
Mm.
asteroid that hasn't been added to astro.com, this might be a better one to look at. Um, but here you would just go in and put, the birth data. So I'm putting my birthday in. Um, I guess you do need to know what like Greenwich time you are, and I don't know that. So I guess for me, like I don't know what Greenwich time I was born. So I'm just gonna put a random time.
You
You
can
can
just click
choose
back to the
a different
Astro,
time
it tells
zone.
you. Well, yeah, but you can go
Yeah,
to
but
Astro here.
okay.
It'll tell you.
Um, so yeah, folks can pull that and research that. This is
Mhm.
just kind of for demonstration's sake. Anyway, I don't
Sure.
need the
But if
house
you're looking for it.
system, but if someone's looking, they can
Yeah.
do that. You can do your intervals, all of that. Do you guys remember? She had like some sort of setting that Demetra had taught us. You'll definitely want to choose, which type of chart you read, and you can play around with these settings and see what data it gives you. Was it show declination? I
I think
forget.
so.
We
Maybe.
can try that. And then you'll hit get ephemeris. Oh, and you have to choose the asteroid that you're looking up as well. That's the whole point. Um, Clearly Lori and I don't use this version.
Yeah, I don't
Where do you
use that
put the
one.
asteroid?
Right there where it says comma, the list of names. Yeah,
Oh,
right there.
in this thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look up. There we go. See, astro.com is really easy. But you can see that
Yeah.
Icarus, as we just pulled in my chart, was at 5 degrees Capricorn when I was born on my birthday. 5 degrees to Capricorn when I was born. So that's another way that you can look up an asteroid. And you can also see how it moves. They don't move too quickly. You can think Mars takes about 2 months to move through a sign unless they're retrograding, and Jupiter spends about a year to move through a sign unless they're retrograding. And so the
Hmm.
asteroids, spend about between that time. Again, the asteroid belt is between Mars and Jupiter. The asteroids, there's millions of them all over the place. So they're not all exactly between Mars and Jupiter, but most of them are there and are moving, about this between the speed of Mars and Jupiter.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Um, what else do we want to say about asteroids, Lori?
Um, let's see. So asteroids, my personal take on like how to use them, is definitely a 3-degree orb. But I always put the planets and the luminaries at a higher importance or a higher value. So anything from the sun until like Saturn, I would consider more of a personal planet and like more if I'm giving an hour-long reading to somebody, I'm going to focus more on those things. And then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Um, I kind of rank them a little bit less so, and I rank the asteroid goddesses and Chiron in with those. So like equally important, but like not as important as your sun, moon, or rising, right? Like
And the
important,
asteroid
but not.
goddesses are Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, and Juno. So those are the four
Yes.
asteroid goddesses. They were the first asteroids discovered. They're the
Hmm.
first four, like their numbers one, two, three, and four in the list. And so, as
Yeah,
Lori's
and
saying, they're more significant than the other asteroids, along with Chiron.
yeah, and as Demetra said too, they are the sisters of the planets of the brothers, and
Hmm.
so they hold a higher ranking than most of the other asteroids. And so with those, I typically like include them as planets. Um, And Demetra also said this too, like include them as planets. And so I will give them a bigger orb. Typically, I tend to use like a 5 to 8 degree orb, depending. And so, personally, like I think those are pretty significant still. But then anything else, if you're looking up your name, if you're looking up other people, other things, other places, you're gonna want to keep to a pretty small orb. Otherwise, you're gonna get overwhelmed because there are hundreds, thousands, there's so
Mm-hmm.
many asteroids that like if you try to use them all, it just becomes overwhelming. And so if you just find the ones that are within 1 to 3 degrees of your sun, 1 to 3 degrees of your moon, and then even just like starting there, and then you can look up things later. Like my last name is 2 degrees away from Jupiter in my fourth house of home and family, and roots. And so I thought that was funny. Like that's cool. That yeah, yep, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not like overly significant. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not really something I would talk about except to give as an example.
Yeah.
Um,
And
whereas some of yeah.
And so, to just really simplify that, the most
Mhm.
important asteroids are the ones that are conjunct your sun, your moon, and then I would also add your ascendant and your ascendant ruler, which is the planet that rules the sign your ascendant is
Yeah.
in. So, if I'm a Libra rising, Venus is my ascendant ruler. And so,
Yeah.
sun, moon, ascendant, and ascendant ruler, the reason for that is because those are the points of life. Those are points that signify our vitality, our personality, our body, our sense of self. And so when
Mhm.
an asteroid is conjunct one of those points, they infuse our entire life. Whereas, an asteroid being conjunct Jupiter in Lori's fourth house is going to have something more to say about her fourth house, as well as the house is ruled by Jupiter, which might be more topically specific. But when you're looking at the points
Right.
of life, those are the asteroids that are most significant. And then echoing what Lori said, generally a 3 degree orb is the most potent, but whatever orb system works best for you, every astrologer has their own orbs. But 3 degrees from a Hellenistic perspective is the most potent of orbs. And generally conjunctions, although,
Yeah.
squares and oppositions and trines, if you see that it's significant, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I definitely would say too, like, I have Persephone 4 degrees away from my sun, but I pretty heavily relate to Persephone. So like it does happen where you have
Mm-hmm.
one that is out of the 3 degrees, um, but still feels significant. And so that's also okay to give that an exception. Um, and yeah, there's definitely times
Absolutely.
where that happens too.
And that's part of, what's so fun about asteroids, what's so fun about astrology is there's theory and then there's real life. And especially with asteroids, because, they've only been discovered in the past 200 years, we're
Mhm.
still creating the theory and the approaches. And so we're just trying, these are guidelines that are given to by Demetra. These are guidelines that are like resonant with my Hellenistic training, ways that like Kelly Surtees, who's one of my main teachers, has taught me to prioritize other ways of approaching charts. Kelly doesn't work with asteroids, but she does teach traditional theory. Um, and so these, this is theory that we're laying out. And then there's real life, and the real life says a whole lot more about how astrology actually works. And so when we actually live it, when we actually experience it, and then when we share our stories, if you have ways that asteroids show up in your life, please let me and Lori know. We would love to hear that. But the theory means nothing if we don't have actual examples and see how it really plays out. And like Lori said, if a 4 degree orb feels potent in your lived experience is a lot more important than like a Hellenistic theory, whatever, say. So,
Right, right. And yeah, I just feel like if you find something that resonates and helps you and it's within 5 degrees, then like count it.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, you've identified some asteroids that are prominent in your chart. Uh, you're wondering how to interpret them. You're like, what does that mean? And so one of like the biggest ways that asteroids show up with interpretations is by bringing myth and story into our understanding of our birth charts. And so we recorded another episode that we'll be releasing soon about different like mythic beings who have to do with underworld mythology and how that's
Yeah.
echoed over and over again in my birth chart. And so my life is an embodiment of underworld initiations and underworld experiences because, I have Ceres and Adonis and Pluto and Mercury all prominent in my chart. And
Yeah.
so it can bring myth, if you know that Icarus or any mythic being is prominent in your chart, reading their myths, reading their stories, reading how they were transmitted through history, like
Yeah.
Demetra talks a lot about the asteroid goddesses and traces them to their more pre-colonial, pre-Olympian, like matrifocal goddess worship like roots, like Ceres is this ancient grain goddess mother. And the story of Persephone's abduction by Hades is actually a story of the colonization of Ceres' people. And that's its
Hmm.
own episode to talk about at another time. But reading the myths of the, asteroids and the beings, the names who are significant in your chart, and reading them back and how different people throughout time have understood those beings, like that's something I know. Adonis is actually a much more ancient entity than even I talk about in our underworld episode. And I haven't
Yeah.
researched farther back to like where did the Greeks get Adonis from? But just immersing yourself in those stories and in that history, you'll see parallels to your life and see how that story shows up. That's something that Lori and we just recorded a bunch of episodes of all these different stories and the ways that learning the
Yeah.
stories of these asteroids then can help you make more sense of your own stories that you're living out and how they connect to
Mhm.
these, broader threads. And so that's one of the biggest ways that asteroids can be used to be interpreted astrologically.
Yeah, and I would say too, like, to take what you just said, but like put it backwards. What myth were you obsessed with as a kid? Like, what stories really resonated with you? What Disney movie was your favorite movie, right? Because if you like deeply resonated with like Hercules, then like there's a lot of myths in there. Which character? Like, what did you feel drawn to and why? And you can start that way and just start saying like, "Hey, I'm noticing a lot of symbolism in my life with this or that.
Hmm.
How can I make sense of it?" Um, and that's kind of how we all got here in the first place. um,
Rabbit holes.
the
So
rabbit
many rabbit
holes.
holes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like if there's a story that you feel really, really drawn to, I was noticing this even in Demetra's workshop. Every time she would tell a story, I like not every story, but like every time she told one that gave me like a feeling, I would notice it. I would be like, "Oh, I resonate with this," or like something very similar to this has happened to me before. I would just start noticing these little pieces, and then I would be like, "Oh, well, where's this in my chart?" And I remembered it pretty deeply with Circe when she was talking about Circe. I just
Hmm.
remember the entire story. I was like, "This seems really familiar." And like this feels really resonant to me, and sure enough, Circe was the exact degree of my son. And I noticed it again when she was talking about some of the healing ones. There's a bunch of like healing asteroids that all speak about like
Yeah.
healing other people, healing yourself, healing through movement, all these things. And I just started looking them all up as she was talking, and I had, I think, almost all of them prominent in my chart. So but then there were other stories she was telling that I was just like, no, that's not me. Like that's not a pattern I get stuck in. That's not something I resonate with. And then I would look it up anyway, and sure enough, yeah, it would be in like Virgo. I have no Virgo placements. It would be like in Virgo in my third house. I'd be like, oh, okay. Well, like
Hmm.
it's not doing anything. So that's why it didn't resonate. So if it's not lighting up anything specific, there can be instances where synastry creates a pattern with them. And I told a story like that in our underworld episode. But
Hmm.
sometimes you have an asteroid and they have an asteroid or somebody else, whoever you're looking at. And then they could be conjunct and you might be playing out a specific story with this other person. Um, whether it's romantic or a friendship or whatever it is. Me and Lila actually have a funny example of that too. I have Chiron directly on her ascendant. My Chiron is in Leo and it's like 2 degrees away from her ascendant. And her Chiron is in Cancer, like 2 degrees away from my ascendant. And so that's something we joke about a lot where, there could be some like weird power control issues with Chiron ascendant synastry. But when we both have it, it's almost like neither of us would ever abuse it because the other person has it too.
Mm.
So there's this like almost mutual like safety in sharing those wounds or like sharing those Chiron energies, but also we
Hmm.
bring out those energies in each other. Like we both are very triggering to each other, but in a healing way, not in a hurting way, because we would never do it in a hurting way, but we bring awareness to it. Um, so even things like that, because neither of us have planets around our chirons either. So they're not
Mm.
overly prominent on our own, but it's something like in our synastry and our friendship um, that I noticed.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and one other thing that I've noticed time and time again as I've learned about more asteroids in my chart is
Mhm.
that they'll make themselves known to you when they're ready to. And so
Yeah.
for every
Timing.
asteroid that's made themselves known to me, it's been after I started living out their mythology. So I started studying
Yeah.
herbalism and then I learned I had Ceres conjunct my ascendant. And I started living in basement apartments in Utah to go skiing for 4 months and being more genderqueer. And then I learned I had Adonis on my ascendant. And then I was reading a book about Paracelsus this past fall and learned that I have Paracelsus conjunct my moon. And I started using sphere and sundry materia to pray to Asclepius. And then I found out I had Imhotep, who's the Egyptian parallel to Asclepius, conjunct my
Mhm.
moon. And so all four of these really prominent asteroids that, I can see ways I live out their mythologies, I didn't learn about them until I started really clearly living out their mythologies. So it can feel overwhelming to be like, oh, there's, almost 28,000 asteroids out there. Where do I even start? What do I look for? But that's, just like Lori said, what myths feel like they're resonant to you? Or if you're a
Yeah.
healer, like who are mythic healing characters? Who are, I've looked up like Hildegard in my chart, who are famous
Hmm.
healers, who are people that you're interested in, who you admire. Look up if there's an asteroid named up after them, look them up in your chart and just go for what you feel called to. And the asteroids will make
Hmm.
themselves known to you when the time is right. It's a very like fate versus free will is a very interesting philosophical conversation with asteroids, but there is definitely a lot of like things that feel very fated about the way that asteroids show up in our charts, even though I want to make it known that I do also believe in free will.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. It's just so crazy when you find a new one and end up searching down that rabbit hole and um yeah, it's just so cool when you find them and then you're like, oh, this just makes so much sense in my life. And just out of the four goddesses too, I have three of them decently prominent. And
Mhm.
so I mean, Palace is directly on my sun. I think about Palace a lot and how I like feel very deeply connected to a lot of themes that she represents. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's really just as you continue on and start to notice patterns in your own life, they appear. And it was
Hmm.
literally the day that I found the Persephone asteroid on my sun. Um, and Palace was actually like I pulled the high priestess that day, which the high priestess in tarot is representative of Persephone. And I was literally eating a pomegranate that my mom gave me. And I just had this thought like, "Oh, I pulled a high priestess today. That's funny that I'm, like, sitting here at my counter, like, slowly eating this pomegranate." And then I started thinking about, I was a Chi Omega in college, the sorority, and the entire sorority's myth actually went into, Demeter and Persephone. That was the basis of um
Mm.
our bylaws or whatever. I don't fully remember any of that, and I'm not sure I'm even allowed to talk about it. But we were like based off of the Demeter Persephone myth, and one of the songs that we had to sing popped into my head about Persephone, and all of a sudden I was like, "Huh, I wonder if Persephone has an asteroid. I'm gonna go look for it," and found it on my sun, and it was just like this whole weird, like, oh, these are weird parallels I keep noticing. I'm eating a pomegranate. Where's Persephone? And then you
Hmm.
find it, and then you start to learn things about what that asteroid could mean or how to interpret. And then you start noticing those parallels in your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. So just, start looking up asteroids and start reading the myths and just kind of start immersing yourself in it. Um, Also, this is, a great segue. Lori has
Mhm.
asteroid readings that she offers. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah. So I have been offering some asteroid specific readings. I do typically recommend that you get a regular reading first, not like doesn't necessarily have to be from me, but you should know your chart at least a little bit before you start diving into the asteroids, or I feel like they're not going to make much sense. Um, so definitely start there, but I offer asteroid readings and I'm more than happy to break them all down and talk about the different myths and see whatever is super prominent in your chart. I am offering 20% off of those right now. And so if you reach out to me from this episode, I would still honor that, even if it's past the time of when I was offering them for. Um, and yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I'm not offering readings at all right now because I am living out my underworld
Mhm,
mythology of being cyclical and taking the winters to rest. But I am planning to revamp kind of my entire astrology reading structure and
mhm,
roll that out most likely in May of this year in 2024. And I'm going to be breaking out, doing natal chart readings, doing topic specific readings, doing asteroid readings, doing herbal readings as well, because I'm an herbalist. So looking, kind of at your health and herbal vitalist lifestyle recommendations and ways to just kind of enhance what's important to you. So if you're listening to this after May of
mhm,
2024, I likely also offer astrology readings for asteroids. But for right now, really, I'm just doing a little bit of quiet, like writing and really like writing about how to build ancestral relations. That's a really big part of how I spend my winters is praying with my ancestors. So I'll link to all this stuff, to get in touch with Lori down below and to interact with my blog as well. And if you're interested in hearing when my readings open, you can sign up for my newsletter on my website, which will also be linked below. And then you'll be the first to hear. And my newsletter
mhm.
subscribers also get discounts as well. Um, but yeah, is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up, Lori?
Yeah, actually, if anybody has any asteroid stories of your own and you would like to either come on, be a guest and share your story with the world, or if I am also writing a book, my second book on the asteroids. And so if you have any stories you want in the book, if it makes sense, feel free to reach out to me about that as well. I'm happy to just be collecting stories. We do have an Instagram now, so feel free to reach out
Mm-hmm.
to us on there, and follow us. And yeah, and if you also just want to chat about asteroids or just have a simple, quick question, you can reach out to us on the Instagram or my personal one as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And just like hearing the asteroid stories really helps you understand how the asteroids work. And we recorded several different episodes talking about lots of different asteroid stories, some with our friend Hannah as well. And we'll be
Mhm.
releasing those pretty soon as well. So if you enjoyed this video, definitely recommend you check out our
Yeah.
asteroid story videos as well to really like get a feel for how asteroids show up. And yeah, as Lori said, we would love to hear from you as well if you have your own asteroid stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.